The boarding area is buzzing with the typical hustle of a busy airport. Marcus stands out in his quiet composure, standing at the gate with headphones on, tapping his fingers lightly against his book. In contrast, Linda is tapping her foot impatiently, constantly glancing at her watch and sighing. The boarding call is made. As they make their way down the jet bridge, Linda ends up behind Marcus, her irritation already visible as she mutters about the delays. On the plane, the two reach their assigned seats. Linda's face tightens when she realizes her seat is next to Marcus. She adjusts her bag with an exaggerated sigh, eyes darting between the seat and Marcus. She hesitates, half turning to look for an attendant. Marcus, noticing the pause, gives her a polite nod and shifts slightly to give her space to sit down. But Linda's irritation deepens as she finally squeezes past him, settling into her seat with an audible huff. As the plane begins taxiing, Linda crosses her arms, muttering barely audibly. Unbelievable. This is what I get for flying economy. Should have just paid for the upgrade. Her tone gets louder. You'd think they'd be more considerate with seating. I deserve better. She shoots another glance at Marcus, her voice dripping with passive aggression. I mean, what kind of seating arrangement is this? Marcus keeps his eyes on his book, pretending not to hear her. She leans slightly toward him. Is there really no one else you could have sat next to? Her voice, now louder, carries across the row, drawing attention. I mean, really. I'm not comfortable. The subtlety of her earlier discomfort is gone. She continues, now talking as if Marcus isn't there. I'm sure someone would be willing to trade. I don't see why I have to sit next to him. A flight attendant approaches, sensing tension. Ma'am, is everything okay? Linda turns to her with a sharp edge in her voice. I'd like to switch seats. I'm not comfortable sitting here. The attendant glances at Marcus, who looks up, offering a calm smile but says nothing. I'm sorry, the flight attendant replies, but we're fully booked. There are no available seats at the moment. Linda's face reddens, frustration boiling over. This is ridiculous. I shouldn't have to sit here if I don't feel safe. At the word safe, Marcus raises an eyebrow, but remains silent. Other passengers start glancing over, some shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The tension is undeniable. Marcus calmly folds his book closed, looks at Linda, and quietly says, If you can find someone who'd prefer this seat, I don't mind moving. This seems to enrage Linda even further. I shouldn't have to ask anyone. They should have considered this when assigning seats. I mean, look at this. I just can't believe it. The flight attendant steps in again. Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but we ask that all passengers remain in their assigned seats for takeoff. We can address seating concerns once we're in the air. Linda scoffs loudly. Unbelievable. This is just perfect. As the plane lifts off, Linda's muttering doesn't cease. She shifts restlessly in her seat, every glance toward Marcus filled with unspoken accusations. This isn't right. She keeps repeating to herself, though loud enough for Marcus to hear. I just can't sit here. Other passengers continue to exchange glances, some whispering among themselves, but no one steps in. The cabin has grown awkwardly quiet, as though everyone is holding their breath, waiting for the situation to explode. Marcus remains poised, eyes occasionally meeting those of the passengers around him. He offers a slight, reassuring smile to a nearby couple who are watching anxiously, then returns to his book, refusing to be baited into the confrontation Linda is clearly seeking. The flight attendant makes another pass through the aisle, catching Linda's eye in an attempt to ease the situation. Ma'am, we really do ask that you remain calm. The flight is only a few hours. Linda rolls her eyes dramatically. A few hours? A few hours here? I shouldn't have to be uncomfortable for any amount of time. The attendant nods sympathetically but doesn't linger, moving down the aisle to avoid further escalation. Marcus, still focused on his book, finally speaks again, his tone measured and polite. If it's that uncomfortable for you, perhaps you could speak to someone when we land. Linda, startled by his calmness, shoots him a glare. Oh, don't act like you don't know why I'm upset. You can sit there all quiet, but I know what's going on here. I don't need to explain myself. Marcus only nods slightly, not engaging further, which only seems to heighten her frustration. The atmosphere in the cabin becomes more strained. Passengers can sense the unease, their eyes shifting between Marcus and Linda. But no one says anything, as if unsure how to defuse the situation without making it worse. The murmurs in the cabin grow, and the hum of the plane becomes background noise to the social tension that has now taken over. Linda's muttering grows louder, her words sharp and cutting. She shifts in her seat, her voice rising just enough to draw more attention. You never know these days, do you? I mean, who knows where he comes from or what he's capable of? The passengers around her begin to glance over, their interest piqued but hesitant. Marcus sits, unbothered, his eyes steady on his book. His silence seems to infuriate her even more. Are we really just going to sit here and pretend everything's fine? Linda continues, turning her head as if addressing the entire row. I don't feel safe. You never know who's dangerous these days. No one checks anymore, and we're just supposed to sit here? A few passengers exchange uneasy glances. Some look away, while others quietly pull out their phones. One woman, sitting across the aisle, offers Marcus a faint, apologetic smile, as if to say, I'm sorry this is happening. Her lips part as if she might say something, but she quickly turns back to her magazine, avoiding confrontation. The atmosphere thickens with tension. The sound of the plane's engine hums in the background, but all eyes are now on the unfolding situation. A middle-aged man a few rows back shifts uncomfortably in his seat, crossing his arms, glancing at Linda, but still not intervening. You're all just going to sit there? What, no one's worried? Linda's voice is sharp now, her words filled with accusations. She leans toward a nearby passenger, whispering loudly enough for all to hear. He could be hiding anything. People like him, you just never know. Marcus still doesn't flinch, his eyes unwavering, his calm a stark contrast to Linda's growing hysteria. He adjusts his posture slightly, making himself more comfortable. He meets the occasional sympathetic glance but offers no visible reaction. A young woman in the row ahead glances over her shoulder, frowning slightly, but when she catches Linda's gaze, she quickly turns back. No one is willing to escalate the situation further. It's as if the passengers have divided into silent factions, with most hoping the conflict will resolve itself without their involvement. The flight attendants move down the aisle again, their faces tense with concern. One of them approaches Linda with a smile strained at the edges. Ma'am, is there anything we can help you with? Linda lets out a sharp breath, waving the attendant away with irritation. You're not going to do anything about this? We're all just supposed to sit here and act like this is normal? We've addressed your concerns, ma'am. If you'd like, we can discuss this further once we land. Linda scoffs, leaning back in her seat dramatically, her arms crossed tight. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. You think this is safe? You think this is acceptable? The attendant gives a tight nod, choosing not to engage further, and moves down the aisle, doing her best to maintain the illusion of calm. But her rushed steps betray her discomfort. A few seats down, a young man lowers his headphones, quietly recording the interaction with his phone angled discreetly. He catches another passenger's eye and raises his eyebrows as if asking, Are you seeing this too? But neither of them speaks up. Another passenger, an older woman in a window seat, looks on with wide eyes but remains still, her fingers gripping the armrest. A teenage boy nearby glances nervously between Linda and Marcus, uncertain of what to make of the situation. Marcus remains a picture of patience, his expression calm, even serene. He closes his book for a moment, setting it aside to look out the window, as if to remove himself from the escalating hostility. His silence is a deliberate choice, a clear message that he refuses to be drawn into the conflict. Linda's voice cuts through the cabin once more. Look at him, sitting there like nothing's wrong. People like him always think they can get away with anything. It's disgusting. And you all just let it happen. A few passengers look at her in shock but quickly avert their eyes, unwilling to get involved. Some seem to be questioning their own inaction, their discomfort growing, but they still choose silence. The tension stretches tighter, a thread close to snapping. The phones continue to record, capturing every word, every moment. Though the faces are obscured, the rawness of the situation is palpable. The quiet clicks of cameras, the murmurs, and the undercurrent of fear and guilt ripple through the cabin. One of the flight attendants leans in to whisper to another, their expressions worried. They hover nearby, unsure of how to handle the growing confrontation without causing a scene. Their reluctance to confront Linda directly only empowers her further. Marcus, sensing the shift, picks up his book again, flipping it open without a word. His calmness now seems almost defiant. He will not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. The passengers are left to reckon with their own choices. The complicit silence of the majority, the cautious support of a few, and the unwillingness of anyone to openly challenge Linda's venomous words. As the situation unfolds, Linda turns her attention back to Marcus, her voice loud and cutting. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you? Sitting there, acting like you're above it all. It's people like you who ruin everything. You shouldn't even be on this flight." There is a pause. A few passengers finally begin to murmur softly to each other, shaking their heads. One man, 2 rows back, clenches his fists but says nothing. Another passenger leans over to his friend, whispering, "Someone should really stop this." But no one does. Linda's words hang in the air, heavy and poisonous. The plane's hum is the only sound left as her tirade simmers for a moment, awaiting a response. But Marcus remains quiet, serene in his refusal to acknowledge her. The cameras continue to capture everything, ensuring that this moment, however ugly, will not go unseen. The hum of the plane engines fades for a moment as the intercom crackles to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to severe weather ahead, we've been instructed to divert to a nearby airport for your safety. We'll be landing shortly, and we appreciate your understanding." A collective groan moves through the cabin. Linda, already on edge, snaps her head toward the front, her face twisting in disbelief. "What? A diversion? Unbelievable!" She slams her hand on the armrest, turning to the flight attendant passing by. "Are you serious? We're landing somewhere else now? You people can't do anything right." The attendant, professional but clearly fatigued by the earlier confrontation, gives a tight smile. "It's for safety, ma'am. There's severe weather, and we need to land at an alternate airport." Linda's eyes narrow. "Severe weather? Sure. You're all just catering to people like him." She jerks her thumb in Marcus's direction without even looking at him, her disdain cutting through the cabin. "You'll go out of your way to make sure he's comfortable, but we all have to suffer for it." Her words hang in the air, biting, as several passengers glance over again. Marcus remains calm, eyes closed, seemingly unbothered. His demeanor, calm and collected, stands in stark contrast to Linda's unraveling fury. He adjusts his headphones, as if retreating further into his own world, completely uninterested in her outbursts. "Look at him," Linda continues, her voice growing louder. "Just sitting there, acting like none of this matters. You think you're better than us? You're not. You should have been kicked off this flight from the beginning. Now we're all stuck here because of you." Marcus remains still, his face serene, as though he's not even hearing her. Linda, however, interprets his composure as arrogance, her frustration bubbling into something darker. She throws her hands up dramatically. "I demand to speak with the pilot. This is ridiculous. Who's in charge here? This entire flight has been a disaster, and it's because of him." A few passengers exchange glances. Some look uncomfortable but still say nothing, while others, those who had previously stayed silent, begin to shift in their seats, clearly uneasy with how far Linda's accusations are going. One man, sitting a few rows behind, leans forward and shakes his head, muttering to his seatmate, "This is going too far. Someone's gotta shut her up." His companion nods, but neither makes a move. Another passenger, a middle-aged woman who had been neutral earlier, leans toward a flight attendant and whispers something. The attendant nods but appears conflicted, caught between maintaining order and dealing with the increasingly aggressive situation. Linda's voice cuts through again. He doesn't belong here. I know his type. You can tell by the way he acts, so entitled, like we owe him something. Her eyes dart around the cabin, looking for validation, but the passengers around her are now visibly uncomfortable. The tension escalates, the air thick with unspoken judgment. But something subtle begins to shift. Where there was once passive complicity, now there is a growing sense of discomfort, not with Marcus, but with Linda's behavior. The veneer of tolerance for her rants begins to crack. A young woman across the aisle, who had earlier looked away, now speaks quietly to her seatmate. This is ridiculous. She's completely out of line. Another passenger nods in agreement, though quietly, as if hesitant to fully engage in the confrontation. She's gone way too far. It's embarrassing. Linda, oblivious to the growing discontent around her, continues her rant. I don't know why they even let people like him on these flights. It's not safe for the rest of us. We should have all been warned. As if on cue, a flight attendant passes Marcus, pausing to offer him a drink, her demeanor respectful, almost deferential. Is there anything I can get you, sir? We'll be landing shortly. Marcus opens his eyes briefly, offering a polite but quiet, no, thank you. His calm politeness seems to irk Linda even more. She watches the interaction, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. Another passenger, seated a few rows up, frowns as if something has clicked. He squints slightly, his gaze lingering on Marcus for a moment longer than before, as if recognizing him but unsure where from. His brow furrows in thought, but he says nothing, choosing to observe quietly. The subtle attention Marcus receives doesn't go unnoticed. Passengers begin to wonder why the flight crew is treating him with such quiet respect, though no one says it outright. Linda, oblivious to the shifting dynamics, raises her voice again. You see that? Special treatment. You know why, don't you? People like him always get special treatment, while the rest of us suffer. But her words now lack the same punch. The passengers around her are no longer nodding in passive agreement, or looking away out of discomfort. There's a growing awareness that Linda's behavior has crossed the line, and attention shifts from Marcus to her. A young man across the aisle, who had been quietly recording the scene, finally speaks up. Hey, maybe you should calm down. It's not his fault the plane's diverting. It's weather, not him. Linda's head snaps toward him, her mouth agape. Excuse me? You don't know what you're talking about. I know enough to see you're harassing him for no reason. The young man replies, still cautious but firmer now. A few passengers murmur in agreement. Linda's fury flares again, but this time, the growing discontent in the cabin seems to undercut her bravado. She glances around, realizing the tide is slowly turning against her, though she refuses to back down completely. Marcus, meanwhile, remains the picture of calm. He pulls out a pair of noise-canceling headphones, placing them gently over his ears, and leans back into his seat. It's a final, quiet act of defiance, a refusal to give Linda the reaction she craves. A few more passengers now glance between Marcus and the flight attendants, wondering why they haven't intervened more assertively. There's a growing sense that something is different about him, something more important than the role he's allowed Linda to paint him into. Linda, seeing Marcus's calm indifference, fumes silently, her power in the situation eroding with each passing minute. The social dynamic in the cabin has shifted, leaving her increasingly isolated, while Marcus remains a quiet enigma, commanding more attention without saying a word. The plane touches down at the diverted airport, and there's a sense of relief among the passengers. They expect the usual hustle of disembarkation, the inconvenience of the diversion still lingering in the air. Linda, however, sits stiffly in her seat, fuming. Her eyes flick to Marcus one last time, brimming with resentment. She's still convinced she's in the right, and her tension simmers with anticipation as she glances toward the front of the plane, waiting for the authorities to board. And they do. 2 uniformed officers, followed by an airport official, make their way down the aisle. Linda straightens in her seat, her lips tightening into a thin smile. She shoots a self-satisfied glance at the passengers around her, expecting their validation. Finally, she thinks, they're going to take care of him. She can almost feel the vindication rising within her, a quiet triumph swelling in her chest as she waits for Marcus to be escorted away in shame. But something is off. The officers aren't moving with the urgency one might expect in the scenario she has built in her head. They approach slowly, calmly, not with the intent to detain, but with deference, respect. The lead officer pauses by Marcus's seat, standing tall. Linda sits up straighter, practically craning her neck in anticipation. But instead of arresting Marcus, the officer offers a polite smile and says, "Mr. Grant, we're here to escort you. Welcome." There's a ripple of confusion in the air. Passengers glance at each other, brows furrowed, trying to process what's happening. Linda's smile falters, her eyes darting back and forth, as if she's missed something crucial. Marcus calmly removes his headphones, nodding to the officer with a soft, "Thank you." He rises from his seat, smoothing his suit jacket with practiced grace. The flight attendants hover nearby, suddenly much more attentive, their earlier tension replaced with reverence. Linda's mouth opens slightly, her face frozen in disbelief. "Wait, what?" she stammers, as if unable to comprehend the situation. She's been expecting a completely different outcome, one where Marcus would be led away in shame, proving her suspicions right. Instead, the officers are here for him, but not in the way she imagined. Not at all. The officer steps aside, allowing Marcus to pass with a respectful nod. "We've arranged for a private transport for you, sir. Apologies for the inconvenience of the diversion." Marcus nods, still calm, still composed. He offers a courteous smile to the flight attendants and begins making his way down the aisle. The realization begins to dawn on the rest of the passengers, trickling in slowly but surely. Some who had remained indifferent are now watching intently, trying to piece together what's happening. A few whisper to each other, leaning in to exchange theories. One man mutters, "Did he say Mr. Grant?" While another passenger nearby responds, "I think that's... Wait, isn't he that civil rights attorney? The one from the news?" Linda's face turns pale, her earlier bravado melting into confusion, then disbelief, and finally shame. What's going on?" she blurts out, her voice shaking slightly. "He's not. He can't be." But the truth is undeniable. Marcus Grant, the man she had spent the entire flight berating, is not just another passenger. He's a well-known public figure, a prominent civil rights attorney whose work has garnered international recognition. His name is synonymous with integrity and justice, and here she was, treating him with contempt, assuming the worst based on nothing but her prejudices. Marcus walks past her without so much as a glance in her direction. His quiet dignity speaks volumes. He doesn't need to confront her. The weight of her actions is enough to bury her in her own shame. Her earlier self-righteousness crumbles, replaced by the sickening realization that she's been harassing someone far beyond her station, someone who had handled her insults with more grace than she deserved. The other passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats, realizing the gravity of what just unfolded. Those who had remained silent, complicit in their inaction, now feel the weight of their choice not to intervene. A few of them steal glances at Linda, their earlier neutrality replaced with disdain. One woman finally breaks the silence, her voice barely above a whisper but loud enough to be heard in the tense quiet. "That's Marcus Grant. He's a hero, you know, all the work he's done for civil rights." The murmurs grow. Linda's face flushes, the reality of her situation sinking in deeper with each passing second. She feels the eyes of the passengers on her, judging, condemning. They distance themselves from her now, no longer willing to be associated with her behavior. As Marcus reaches the front of the plane, one of the flight attendants who had earlier tried to defuse the situation steps forward, now addressing him with newfound respect. "We're so sorry for the trouble, Mr. Grant. We didn't realize." Marcus turns, offering a small, knowing smile. "It's all right. Thank you for your professionalism." His voice is calm, measured, carrying no trace of resentment, even after the ordeal he's endured. But behind him, Linda is shrinking in her seat. She no longer has the confidence to speak, to lash out. Her earlier arrogance has evaporated, leaving only the raw humiliation of being exposed, not just for her ignorance, but for her cruelty. She sits, paralyzed, watching Marcus being treated with the respect and dignity she denied him. As Marcus exits the plane, the video footage from earlier has already started circulating online. Several passengers, still sitting in their seats, check their phones. The headlines are brutal. Racist passenger harasses civil rights attorney on plane. And passenger's true identity exposes her bias. Linda glances around, the sinking feeling in her stomach deepening. She knows what's coming. Her face will be plastered across social media, dissected and condemned by people she's never met. Her life, as she knew it, will never be the same. The tables have turned completely. The whispers around her grow louder, the condemnation more palpable. Passengers who had earlier stayed quiet are now openly distancing themselves from her. Some shake their heads in disgust. Others snap pictures, ensuring that her face becomes part of the viral story. As the plane empties out, Linda remains frozen in her seat, her world collapsing around her. The power she thought she wielded has vanished, replaced by the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny. Her humiliation is complete, and there's no escaping it now. As the plane doors open and the passengers begin to disembark, the atmosphere is tense but oddly quiet. Marcus, still calm and composed, is the first to be escorted off the plane. The officers walk beside him, speaking in low tones, but it's clear from their respectful body language who he is and the status he carries. Passengers who had remained indifferent throughout the flight watch him go, eyes widened in belated recognition. There's no applause, no fanfare, just a lingering, silent acknowledgement of who Marcus truly is. In contrast, Linda tries to blend into the background, keeping her head down, but she can't escape the palpable scorn radiating from the other passengers. A middle-aged woman behind her mutters under her breath, loud enough for Linda to hear, "You should be ashamed of yourself." Another passenger, a younger man with a disgusted expression, shakes his head as he passes by her. He doesn't say a word, but the look in his eyes speaks volumes. There's no sympathy for Linda now, only judgment. Linda doesn't respond. Her once confident posture is gone, replaced by a defeated slouch as she hurries to leave the plane, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The weight of what just happened hangs over her like a storm cloud, and she knows there's no escaping it. By the time Linda steps into the terminal, she can feel the shift in the air. People are already glued to their phones, scrolling through social media, where the video of her tirade is rapidly spreading. Recorded from multiple angles, the footage shows her relentless harassment of Marcus, her demeaning words, her entitlement. Millions of views are racking up by the minute, and the captions accompanying the posts are brutal. "Racist passenger shamed on international flight," and "White woman loses it on civil rights attorney," are just the beginning. As Linda walks through the airport, she catches snippets of conversations from passengers who had been on the flight with her. They're talking about her, about how awful it all was, how Marcus didn't deserve any of it. "Did you see the way she kept going, even when everyone knew she was in the wrong?" one person says. "I don't know how he stayed so calm," another adds. Linda wants to sink into the floor, to disappear completely. But the reality is, she can't. The consequences of her actions are only just beginning. In the days following the incident, the video continues to spread like wildfire. It becomes a topic of national conversation, sparking debates about racism, privilege, and the ways people respond to injustice in real time. Pundits discuss it on news channels, and social media explodes with commentary. Everyone has an opinion on what happened. Some are enraged by Linda's blatant racism, others by the passive complicity of the passengers who did nothing until the very end. Marcus, despite being at the center of the viral storm, remains remarkably low-key. He agrees to a single media interview, not to talk about himself, but to address the broader issues the incident has brought to light. Sitting calmly in front of the interviewer, Marcus speaks with the same grace and dignity he showed on the plane. "The most important thing to understand here," he begins, "is that it shouldn't matter who I am. The focus shouldn't be on my job or my title. The problem is much deeper. What matters is the way we treat each other, the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, and how those things play out in moments like this. He pauses, thoughtful. We have to ask ourselves, would the reaction have been the same if I weren't a public figure? If I were just another man trying to get from one place to another? This incident wasn't about me as an individual, it's about how society views people who look like me. His words resonate across the nation. Many people who had initially fixated on Marcus's status now reconsider their perspective. His emphasis on decency and the need for systemic change strikes a chord, and the conversation shifts from the sensationalism of the event to the larger issue of everyday racism and how it can manifest in public spaces. Meanwhile, Linda's life takes a sharp downward spiral. Her face is plastered all over the internet, and people are quick to identify her. She loses her job within days, her employer issuing a statement condemning her behavior and making it clear that she no longer represents their values. Friends distance themselves, and Linda finds herself increasingly isolated. Her attempts to apologize online are met with anger, as people point out that her apologies ring hollow in light of her behavior. In private, Linda is left to reckon with herself. The silence in her home is suffocating. The people who once supported her are gone, and she spends her days reading the vitriolic comments posted about her online. She's become a symbol, the face of something she never thought she'd be a part of. And yet there it is, her own actions, laid bare for the world to see. At night, she sits alone, replaying the events in her head. Could she have stopped? Could she have chosen differently? The questions gnaw at her, but whether they lead to genuine reflection or just self-pity remains unclear. The final image of Linda is one of isolation. Her future is uncertain, and it's left ambiguous whether she will change or cling to the bitterness that led her to that point. As the public furor eventually subsides, the broader conversation sparked by the incident continues. People everywhere reflect on their own roles in situations like this. What would they have done if they were on that plane? Would they have spoken up sooner? Would they have been complicit through silence? The story lingers, not because of Marcus's status, but because it exposed the truth that many would prefer to ignore. In the end, the story isn't just about one racist woman or one calm man. It's about the choices people make in moments of tension and the need for active allyship, empathy, and courage in the face of injustice. The reflection leaves the audience with an unsettling question. In a world where moments like this happen every day, what will you do the next time?